This evening we are going to honor and speak about Manoj Das, the writer. Um, this is in the context of the Pondicherry Book Club. Uh, this club has been started because books have lost the place of importance they once had. Most people who used to read books now have started reading, have started watching videos. They read short texts on the internet, but hardly anybody actually picks up a book to read from one cover to the other cover. So this is an effort to bring back people to books, which is why we take up an author every month and we speak about the author and his or her books. So in this month of August, we are going to talk about Manoj Das. He has probably, if I'm not mistaken, he's the most highly honored writer who lived in Pondicherry. Manoj Das passed away in 2021, in April 2021. So it has been a little more than a year since he left this world. But he lived in Pondicherry for more than 50 years, even though he was from Odisha. And he was given, I think, if I'm not mistaken, nobody from Pondicherry has ever received so high an honor as the Padma Bhushan. So he was considered as, when he was given this honor of the Padma Bhushan, both Pondicherry and Odisha claimed that he was a resident, he was someone from their state, and rightly so. And he should be somebody who everybody in Pondicherry should be familiar with. But of course, the kind of books he wrote has slowly become not so popular. So it is not surprising that when people have heard of him, but they have not really read his books. Now I will just briefly talk a little bit about his life and then we'll move on to his works. So Manoj Das was born in Odisha, and he was in his early childhood he had seen a lot of suffering, human suffering around in his village, because it was still pre-independent India, and it was a time when in the early 1940s there were a lot of famines. Manoj Das was born in the district of Baleswar, which is very close in Odisha, which is very close to West Bengal. So the famines of 1942-43 were still there. He saw people come out of that and suffer because of that, in great poverty. So although he was born in a well-to-do family, because of all the poverty he had seen around him, he was a very strong, he turned very strongly to Marxism, and he was very active in that kind of political field in his college student days. But this problem of why should there be so much suffering in the world was always tormenting him. It was always there at the back of his mind. And so, after he finished his studies, he was teaching in a college in Odisha, and he would have continued that way. But his curiosity and his thirst to know how the world can be saved from suffering had led him to read the books of Sri Aurobindo, and that brought him to Pondicherry. He and his wife, Pratigya, who was also somebody very eminent, came to Pondicherry in 1963. They had actually come to just visit Pondicherry because they had heard about it and they had read Sri Aurobindo's works. But after they had spent some time and visited Pondicherry, they both took the decision that they would settle down here in Pondicherry. So even before they went back, they took the decision that they would settle down and they would come back. They would sort out their things and come back. And so that decision was taken there and then. And they moved. They went back and then they moved back to Pondicherry and they settled for good. For good. I don't think Pratinyati ever left Pondicherry once she came in 63. So you have to note that 1963 was a time when Pondicherry had just been free, had just been independent from the French rule and had just joined the Indian Union. So it was a time when Pondicherry was really not very developed. It was like a big village. People were still, it was still a very sleepy place. Nothing much happened here. So once Manoj Das moved to Pondicherry, initially he was given the work of helping to edit the main cultural and literary magazine of the ashram, which is called Mother India, and he joined that because he had already published some writing. Although his main writing was in Korean, he had already published his writings. He was already not still so well known, but a known name. So evidently, when a person who is used to writing came to the ashram thought it was a great opportunity to give him the work of assisting the editor of the magazine, Mother India. He did that. At the same time, he also started teaching. But what is less known is that he was also given the charge of a hostel for children. He and his wife looked after these children for around from 63 to up to 72. They looked after a large group of children, about 20 children, and that completely, it was like a full-time activity for both of them. When they were living in this hostel with the children, Manoj Das was given it was a house with 3 floors, the ground, first and second floor. I'm saying this with first-hand knowledge because I was one of the children in that hostel. Manoj Das used to live on the second floor and the children lived on the ground floor and first floor. And he lived on the second floor, but he spent all his time reading and writing. He was given he had this top floor so that he would be totally undisturbed. He could focus, concentrate on his writing, and that was the main thing. Nobody ever went to disturb him or ask him a question or to complain against anything because there were strict instructions not to disturb him. Now, even though he was in the ashram, even though he had the work of looking after so many children and also of teaching and also of assisting in the editorial work of the magazine, still he decided to write for various journals outside because it was something he had already done. And through this work, I seem to remember that he had written something in the Illustrated Weekly of India which caught the attention of G.D. Birla. And then one day he received a letter from Mr. G.D. Birla, the Birla, saying that if Manoj Das wanted to do some research work, he would fund him. He would give him all the money he needed to do this research. I think he had written an article on the freedom movement, and so G.D. Birla said, if you would like to do any research on this, I will fund you. So it was a fantastic opportunity, and he decided that he would do the research on the freedom movement, particularly that particular part of the freedom movement which was headed by Sri Aurobindo, and he said, I would like to go to England and do my research there to see what exactly was said by the British press, by the British administration, by the British government in regard to this part of the freedom movement. As you all know, Sri Aurobindo was arrested in the Alipur bomb case, and in those days there was no internet. One had to read all the various papers to know what was being said about these events. Now, most people knew what was being said in India, newspapers, etc. published how this case had been taken up and how it had been followed up. But nobody knew what was the reaction in Britain, what was the way people saw it there. So, Manoj Das decided that he would go to England and do the research there. And for this, Mr. Birla was going to give him the money. The only thing was that Manoj Das felt that as he was working in the ashram, he didn't want to leave and go somewhere, leaving his work that he had been given to do in the ashram. So he asked the mother, can I go out? I would like to do this research, but I will only do it if you allow me. And she was very enthusiastic, and she willingly, very happily encouraged him to do this and said, please, do with my blessing, you can go and do this work. So in the early 1970s, Manoj Das traveled to England, and there he stayed for some time, a few months, and he had people there who helped him to get access to all the archival material or the documents which were there regarding this particular event, the Alipur bomb case, regarding Sri Aurobindo's political life, what had been said there, and he found a lot of things. In fact, he also got the exact words that had been said in a discussion in the British Parliament about the arrest, about the fact that Sri Aurobindo had been arrested and kept in a solitary cell in a prison, whether it was right or wrong. In fact, he discovered much more than what he had thought he would find. And with all the material that he got, he came back to Pondicherry and he wrote a book called Sri Aurobindo in the First Decade of the Century. After the year 2000, this book was republished and it was given a new title called Sri Aurobindo in the First Decade of the 20th Century, because the century, now we are in another century. So that century we have to say in the 20th century. And it was something very important and very revelatory. After which he continued to stay here, and then he continued to write. Now this is what is so extraordinary about Manoj Das, is that he wrote fiction as well as non-fiction. But the most extraordinary thing is that he wrote in two languages. He wrote in Oriya and he wrote in English equally well. Now, as of now, in the year 2022, there are very few people in India who can write well in two languages. If they write very well in an Indian language, then it is doubtful they will be able to write well in English. If they write very well in English, it's doubtful they will be able to write very well in their mother tongue or any Indian language. So, there are very few writers in India who have written and published in two languages. And Manoj Das is one of them. The extraordinary thing about him, again, is that he wrote fiction and non-fiction. He wrote in the non-fiction, he wrote about philosophical matters, but also about the world, whatever was happening, current events. He wrote columns in newspapers. He wrote for the Times of India. He wrote for Hindustan Times. He wrote for the Statesman. He wrote regularly for various newspapers. It's very difficult if you are living in Pondicherry and completely cut off from the world to be able to follow what is happening in the world and to have an opinion about it. But he did that. And also he travelled extensively to lecture. Whenever he was invited to go and give a talk, he never hesitated. He went and gave talks all over India, and that's how he was very well known. But once again, even though he lived here for 50 years, and he didn't actually go and live in India, in Odisha anymore, still he remains and he remained an iconic writer in Odisha. He is one of the highest writers in Odisha. He has been given a lot of awards, literary awards in Odisha, and his texts are studied in textbooks, what he wrote. He is read by all the students who study Oriya language. It's one of the compulsory materials for study. And I have said at the beginning, he's one of the highest honored writers of Pondicherry. I must also say that he received the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1972, and then he received also the Saraswati Samman in the year 2000. In the year 2001, he was given Padma Shri. And then in 2021, he received the Padma Bhushan, which was just before he passed away, which is a very sad thing, because by the time, because of the COVID, the actual ceremony of being given these Padma Awards was held a little bit later, and by the time the ceremony was held, he had already passed away. So his niece, actually, his brother's daughter, went to to receive it from the President of India. He was no more alive, so it was something a bit of a pity, but he was already very unwell. Even if he had been alive, he may not have been able to travel to Delhi to attend this ceremony. And he has received various other literary awards, which are not so noteworthy. And he continued to be published. Another thing I must tell you is that he wrote extensively in Oriya. He wrote novels as well as short stories. And his short stories are very well known. So, when he was asked when people said, okay, we want to publish your Oriya short stories in English, will you translate them? He said, why should I translate them? I will rewrite them in English, in my own English words, in my own words. If I am the writer in the original language, why should I translate word by word for it and rewrite it? And so, many of his short stories, he rewrote them in English. This evening we will have one of his short stories which will be read out. This short story was originally written in Oriya. And I will say a few words about short stories before we have the reading. This literary genre of short stories is very popular because at the beginning, when people wanted to read fiction, not everybody had access to books because books were expensive and there were not that many libraries. So all over the world, newspapers and magazines would carry short stories so that anybody could read them. You spend that little bit of money to buy a magazine or a little bit of money to buy a newspaper, and you, especially the Sunday editions, would have a short story so that people could read stories, fiction, without spending much money. So this genre slowly became very popular, and of course it developed slowly. The modern short story, it is generally accepted, was more or less given a form and a style by Maupassant, the French writer Guy de Maupassant. And then this tradition started of writing the modern short story, which usually has a twist at the end. It usually has a surprise end. So, writers, it's a very interesting, gripping kind of story because you start reading and you know that there is some kind of a mystery which will be solved at the end. Something, a twist. The real fun will be at the end. And so this form has acquired such popularity that most people who want to write very often start by writing short stories, because it's very difficult to, all the people who say, oh, one day I'm going to write a book and want to write a novel, it's very difficult to start a novel and to actually be able to finish it. There must be thousands of people who have started a novel but who have never gone beyond page 10. But because there is a whole structure, there's a way of writing a novel. But a short story, almost anybody who likes writing can do it. And there are competitions for short stories. There are a lot of people who have short story anthologies. It's very easy to start and finish a short story, to read as well as to write. Now, in the last couple of years, there is also something called flash fiction, which means you write a short story in exactly 100 words or 200 words. You can read it in exactly 5 minutes, because people's attention span has become smaller and smaller and smaller, and nowadays they can't even read a short story which goes beyond 5-6 pages. So now you read short stories which are written in 100 words. So this is just a reflection on our times. So this literary genre of short stories is probably the type of fiction that more people read and more people write. So this evening we will have one of Manoj Das's very well-known and popular short stories read out to you by Savera. Savera, please come on the
Mystery of the Missing Cap. It is certainly not my motive in recounting this episode of 2 decades ago to raise a laugh at the expense of Sri Maharana and Babu Bir Kishore, then the Honorable Minister of Fisheries and Fine Arts of my state. On the contrary, I wish my friends and readers to share the sympathy I have secretly nurtured in my heart for these two gentlemen over the past years. Sri Maharana was a well-to-do man. His was the only Pakka house in an area of 20 villages. Whitewashed on the eve of India achieving independence, the house shone as a sort of tourist attraction for the folks of the nearby villages. They stopped to look at it, for none could overlook the symbolism in this operation that had been carried out after half a century. Sri Maharana had a considerable reputation as a conscientious and generous man. He was an exemplary host with 2 ponds full of choice fish and a number of pampered cows. He was a happy villager. Came independence. As is well known, the ancient land of India has had 4 castes from times immemorial. But during the days immediately preceding independence, a new caste was emerging all over the country, that of the Patriots. Independence Day, 15th August 1947, gave a big boost to their growth. In almost every village, besides the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras, a couple of patriots came into being. It was observed that the small fisheries of Sri Maharana were often exploited in honor of these new people. And observers began to notice that Sri Maharana himself was fast growing into a patriot. As I found out later, he had even nurtured an ambition to be elected to the state legislature. The incident I relate occurred at the outset of his endeavor in that direction. A small boy, I was then on a visit to my maternal uncle's house, which was in the immediate neighborhood of Sri Maharana's. In those early days of indigenous ministries, there were no deputy or sub-deputy ministers. All were full-fledged honorable ministers, and since Babu Bir Kishore hailed from our district, the sponsors of Sri Maharana thought it proper that the latter's debut in politics should have his blessings. That was a time when the minister's daily life was largely made up of speech making in public meetings. There was no need for any specific occasion to accord a reception to a minister. A reception was arranged for Babu Bir Kishore with Sri Maharana as the chairman of the preparatory committee. Sri Maharana's huge ancestral chair was laid with a linen cover on which the most gifted village seamstress had laced a pair of herons holding two ornamented fish in their beaks. The children of the village lower primary school were made to practice a welcome song for every afternoon for a fortnight. Among the many strange phenomena brought by the great spirit of the time was the composition of this song. For the composer, the head pundit of the school had gone for 55 years without any poetic activity. The refrain of the song still raises echoes in my memory. Its literal translation would be, "O mighty minister, tell us, oh tell us, how do you nurture this long and broad universe?" The rest of the song catalogued the great changes nature and humanity experienced on the occasion of the minister's visit. How the morning sun frequently blushed in romantic happiness. How each and every bird chanted a particular salutation-oriented raga. And with what eagerness and throbbing of heart the women folk waited to blow their conch shells in unison when the minister would set his foot on village soil. I know that nowadays ministers do not enjoy such glory, but it was very different then. We, the rustic children, wrangled over several issues. What does a minister eat? What does he think? Does he ever suffer from colic or colds as ordinary mortals do? Sri Maharana himself was excitement personified. He used to be very fond of his hour-long afternoon nap, but he gave up the luxury at least 10 days prior to the day of destiny. He devoted all his time to examining and re-examining details of the arrangements. Even then, he seemed nervous and uncertain. At last dawned the big day. The minister got down from the jeep as soon as it reached the very first welcome arch at the outskirts of the village. He was profusely garlanded by Sri Maharana, but was requested to re-enter the jeep as the destination was still a furlong away. But the minister smiled and made some statement which meant that, great though destiny had made him, he still liked to keep his feet on the ground. Maharana and his friends looked ecstatic, while hundreds applauded and shouted, "Babu Bir Kishore ki jai and Bharat Mata ki jai." The minister, double the size of an average man of our village, plodded through the street, it seemed to us to the embarrassment of the poor naked earth. And I still remember the look of Sri Maharana when the minister's long round arm rested on his shrunken neck, a look which I have seen only once or twice later in life on the faces of dying people who had lived a long and contented life. Sri Maharana's look suggested, "What more? What more, O my mortal life, can you expect from this world? My. All the people, even invalids, for many of whom it was the experience of a lifetime, were alternately shouting slogans and gaping at the august visitor. We, the half-naked, pot-bellied, uncivilized kids, walked parallel to the minister at a safe distance and could not help feeling extremely small and guilty. At Sri Maharana's house, the minister and his entourage were treated to tender coconut water, followed by the most luxurious lunch I had ever seen, with about 20 dishes around a sweetened ghee-baked rice mixed with nuts and cloves. Soon, the minister retired to the cabin set apart for him. Though it was summer, the cabin's window being open to a pond and a grove, there was enough air to lull even an elephant to a sound sleep. Volunteers had been posted everywhere to see that no noise whatever was made anywhere in the village to disturb the ministerial repose. I had by then separated myself from my companions. Being rather ambitious, I was eager to be as physically close to the great man as possible. And the minister's sleeping was surely the most ideal condition for achieving my goal. I mustered courage and slowly approached the window facing the pond. This was the rear side of the house. The minister's personal assistant and entourage were on the opposite side. While I stood near the window, suffering the first shock of disillusionment in my life regarding great men, for the minister was snoring, just like any ordinary man. Something most extraordinary happened. Speechless, I was already. This incident rendered me witless. Through the window, I had observed that the minister's egg-bald head rested on a gigantic pillow, while his white cap lay on a table near his bed. Now, I saw the mischievous Chandu bounce towards the window like a bolt from blue and pick up the cap. Throwing a meaningful glance at me, he disappeared into the grove. Even when my stupefaction passed, I was unable to shout, partly because of my deep affection for Chandu, knowing that the consequences of his crime could be fatal to him, and partly for fear that the minister's dream must be of a patriotic theme might cease. At that crucial moment, I was in a dilemma as to which I should value more, the great man's cap or his snoring. I retreated, pensive. But before long, I heard an excited but subdued noise. Crossing into Sri Maharana's compound again, I saw the minister's personal assistant flitting about like a butterfly and heard his repeated mumbling, mysterious, mysterious. The minister was obviously inside the cabin, but nobody dared to go in. Sri Maharana stood thunderstruck, as were his compatriots. The public relationship officer was heard saying, "The Honorable Minister does not mind the loss of the cap, so much so as the way it was stolen. Evidently, there was a deep-rooted conspiracy. The gravity of the situation can hardly be exaggerated. In fact, I fear it may have devastating effects on the political situation of our country." I could see Sri Maharana literally shaking. He was sweating like an ice cream stick, so much so that I was afraid at that rate he might completely melt away in a few hours. The conflict within me as to whether I should keep the knowledge of the mystery to myself or disclose it was resolved. I signaled Sri Maharana to follow me, which he eagerly did. A drowning man would indeed clutch at a straw. I told him what had happened. He stood down for a moment, eyes closed. Then wiping the sweat from his forehead, he smiled like a patient whose disease had been accurately diagnosed but was known to be incurable. He then patted me and said, "My son, good you told me. Keep it a secret. I will reward you later." The incident had thrown a wet blanket on the occasion. The sepulchral silence in the minister's room was broken only by his intermittent coughing, and every time he coughed, a fresh wave of anxiety hit the people in the courtyard and on the veranda. I went away to join my friends. They were wild with speculations. One said that the thief, when caught, was to be hanged on the big banyan tree beside the river. "Perhaps all the villagers will be thrown into jail," said another. Among us, there were some naives who even believed that the minister's cap was a sort of Aladdin's lamp, that whoever put it on would be endowed with ministerial power the very next moment. But the situation changed all of a sudden. I saw the minister and Sri Maharana emerging on the veranda, the former all smiles. It was the most remarkable smile he had hitherto displayed. By then, at least half a dozen caps had been secured for him, but he appeared with his head bare. Even to a child like me, it was obvious that his bald pate wore an aura of martyrdom. Not less than 5,000 people had gathered in front of a specially constructed stage when the minister ascended it, that remarkable smile still clinging to his face. Sri Maharana's niece, the lone high school going girl of the region, got into the minister. A thunderous applause greeted the event, for that was the first time our people saw what they had only heard in the tales of ancient Swayamvaras, a young female garlanding a male in public. Then the chorus, "O mighty minister," was sung in Kirtan style to the accompaniment of two harmoniums, a violin and a pakawach drum. Now, it was Sri Maharana's turn to say a few words of welcome. I saw him moving his legs and hands in a very awkward fashion. That was certainly nervousness. But with a successful exercise of willpower, he grabbed the glittery mic and managed to speak for nearly 2 hours, giving a chronological account of Babu Bir Kishore's achievements and conveying gratitude on behalf of the nation to the departed souls of the great man's parents, but for whom the world would have been without the minister. I was happy that Sri Maharana did well in his maiden speech. But the greatest surprise was yet to come in the concluding observations of Sri Maharana. Well, many would take Sri Maharana as a pakka politician, but I swear that it was out of his goodness, a goodness confused with excitement, that he uttered the lie. He said, his voice raised in a crescendo, "My brothers and sisters, you must have heard about the mysterious disappearance of the Honorable Minister's cap. You think that the property was stolen, don't you? Naturally. But not so, ladies and gentlemen, not so." Sri Maharana smiled mysteriously. The minister nodded his big clean head, which glowed like a satellite. Sri Maharana resumed, "You all are dying to know what happened to the cap, isn't that so? Yes, naturally you're dying. Well, it is like this. A certain nobleman of our locality took it away." Why? That's what you asked, don't you? Well, to preserve it as a sacred memento, of course. He was obliged to take it away secretly because otherwise the Honorable Minister of Fisheries and Fine Arts, the brightly burning example of humility that he is, would never have permitted our friend the nobleman to view the cap as anything sacred. Sri Maharana stopped and brought out of his pocket a handkerchief full of coins, and holding it before the audience said, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, the nobleman has requested me to place this humble amount of 101 rupees at the disposal of the Honorable Minister for some little use in his blessed life's mission, the service of the people through fish and fine arts." Sri Maharana bowed and handed over the money to the minister who, with the most graceful gesture, accepted it. Applause and cries of wonder and appreciation broke out like a hurricane. Even the minister and Sri Maharana, both looking overwhelmed, clapped their hands. The minister spoke for 2.5 hours thereafter, drinking a glass of milk in between, at the end of which he declared that as a mark of respect to the unknown lover of his, he had decided to remain bareheaded for the whole night, Although the good earth did not lack caps, and in fact, a surge of caps had already tried to occupy his undaunted head. Soon, my shock gave way to a double-edged feeling for Sri Maharana. Praise for his presence of mind, and regret for him having to spend 101 rupees to cover Chandu the monkey's mischief. At night, the respectable people of the area partook of the dinner that the preparatory committee threw in honor of the minister. Glances of awe and esteem were frequently cast at the minister's head, and homages paid to the honorable thief. But when I saw Sri Maharana in the morning, I could immediately read in his eyes the guilt that haunted him, at least whenever his eyes fell on me. Sri Maharana perhaps had never spoken a lie, and now when he did speak one, he did so before a gathering of thousands. God apart, at least there was one creature, myself, who knew that he was no longer a man of truth. The minister, however, exuded sheer delight. He did not seem to notice with what constraint Sri Maharana was conducting himself around him. At last came the moment of the minister's departure. He was served with a glass of sweetened curd. While sipping it leisurely, he said, in a voice choked with curd and emotion, "Ha ha ha! Oh well, Maharana! The way things are moving, soon people will start snatching away my clothes. And I may have to go about naked. But I don't mind. This is the price one must pay to win love." The minister came out to the near veranda facing the pond in the grove to wash his mouth. Sri Maharana followed him with water in a mug. Except for me, there was nobody on the veranda. My presence was not accidental. A few minutes before, I had observed that the rascal Chandu, playing with the minister's cap, was slowly emerging from the grove. Seldom had I wished for anything so ardently as I wished then for Chandu to go unnoticed by the guest. He was a monkey not in any figurative sense, but a real one. When he was an infant, his mother had taken shelter inside Sri Maharana's house in order to save her male child from the usual wrath of his father. Sri Maharana had not been at home, and his servants killed the mother monkey. Sri Maharana felt extremely upset, did not eat for 1.5 days, and to compensate for the wrong done, nurtured the baby monkey, christened Chandu, with great affection. Chandu, when he grew up, would often escape into the grove. He was half domesticated and half wild. He played with everybody, and everybody tolerated him. We children were extremely fond of him. To my horror, I saw Chandu rushing towards us from the other side of the pond. I made an effort to warn Sri Maharana of the impending crisis, but in vain. Chandu got there in the twinkling of an eye. He sat down between the minister and Sri Maharana. He put the cap once on his own head, then taking it off, offered it to the minister in a most genial gesture. My heartbeats had trebled. Looking at Sri Maharana's face, I saw an extremely pitiable image, pale as death. The bewildered minister mumbled out, "Isn't this one the very cap taken away by that nobleman?" And something most fantastic came out of the dry lips of Sri Maharana, who seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Yes, this is that nobleman." His eyes bulging out, the minister managed to ask, "What? What did you say?" "Well," but Sri Maharana was in no condition to say anything more. He broke into tears. Next moment, I saw the Honorable Minister of Fisheries and Fine Arts weeping too. the personal assistant's voice was heard from the opposite veranda. "Sir, the jeep is ready, sir." The minister gulped the mugful of water and walked towards the jeep. Shri Maharana followed suit. Their reddened eyes and drawn faces were interpreted as marks of the sorrow of separation. Shri Maharana's political endeavour is not known to have gone any further, and it is strange that the Honourable Minister, Babu Bir Kishore, who was willing to be robbed of his clothes, was soon forgotten in politics. I have a strong feeling that it was this episode of the cap that changed the courses of their lives.
So that was the short story about the missing cap. I will say a few words to end this evening's program. As we all know that writers continue to live even after they have passed away, that their body is no more alive. They continue to be alive in the minds of the people. Actually, Manoj Das was given a state funeral when he passed away, even though it was the times of the COVID, and as you all know, he did not die of COVID, he died of other ailments. But people were not allowed to go to the cremation places, but still, at the request of the government of Orissa, and also very eagerly accepted by the government of Pondicherry, he was given a state funeral with policemen giving gun salutes at his funeral. Yes, he is no more in this world, but as all good writers, he will continue to live in the minds of his readers, who will continue to read his books, who will continue to read his stories, which he wrote. He is known for his gentle humor. He is known for observing human nature, as we just saw in this short story. He is known for his deep insight into the way the world has evolved. And even though this kind of, his early stories were based on myths and legends, but also there are a lot of modern stories. He has also written some travel books. And this is the wonderful thing about him, that he continued to write till the very end of his life. In fact, his last book, on which he worked for several years, was published just days before he died. His last book is called, it's a huge volume like that of 800 pages, it's called The Life and Times of the Mahayogi. It is on the pre-Pondicherry days of the life of Sri Aurobindo. And I remember that they were hurrying up to print it as quickly as possible, because they knew that Manoj Das was not going to live much longer. He was already, people knew his days were counted. And fortunately, they managed to get the book out of the press while he was still alive, and he could have the joy of seeing his book in his hands. He had worked on it for several years. And as I say, he will continue to live in the world, in the intellectual world, because only recently the government of Orissa has instituted a literary award which will be given every year to a writer. This award will be given by the government of Orissa, but it is open to any Indian living in any state, to a good writer. But the conditions are that this author must have already written at least 10 books. There will be a panel of judges who will judge according to the number of the shortlist, from the long list and the short list. They will choose a writer that they will think merits this award. And this award comes with a cash prize of rupees 10 lakhs, which is not a small sum. And in his name, in his honor, it will be called the Manoj National Award. And it will be given to a good writer living in any state of India, writing in English, and whose writing is of good quality. So, at least the government of Orissa, who considers him one of their iconic writers, is going to make sure that his name lives on through this award. Here, of course, all the people who have personally known him will never be able to forget him, because even more important than all the awards and honors that he received, the most important thing is that Manoj Das was an extraordinary human being. He was, as a human being, as a person, he was outstanding. Even if he had not received a single award in his life, he would still have been a person of great value that people would have always felt grateful to have known, because he was a man of such wonderful qualities. He was a perfect gentleman. He never ever hurt anybody. He always spoke with such politeness. He was always warm and welcoming, always full of affection. This kind of people are very rare now. That old style of being polite, graceful, kind has somehow started receding into the background. He belonged to that generation which believed that you have to be kind, polite, warm with everybody. So, on a personal level, he was really a very wonderful, fine human being, highly admired, highly respected. Even if he had not received any other award, people's respect and regard for him itself is a very high honor. And he will continue to live in the memory of those who knew him personally for as long as they live, because he is somebody who was quite unforgettable. And with this, I conclude this evening's program. Thank you for having come. Thank you for listening with patience. I will just show you a few images of Manoj Das at various ages. Here is a very early one. He is giving a lecture. As I told you, he traveled extensively to go and lecture in many places in India, on various subjects, but very often in the early years he spoke a lot about Shiva. This is probably taken in the late 1960s. That is him, again taken very late. This is a very beautiful picture of him. However, it's a very small image, but you can see in the background, it's the Pondicherry Beach Road, and that's the little park at the end near Park Guest House. Since you're so kindly brought the water, that was wonderful, Savera.
Thank you.
You read with such feelings, so wonderful.
Nice.
I can see the future actor in you.
It is really well done.
Thank you.
Very much theatre like. You're interested in theatre?
Yeah.
The voice and diction is